we'd like everyone to come in, grab a seat, get comfortable. We have a lot to get through tonight, so we're going to go ahead and get the program started.
Well, good evening. Thank you for coming to tonight's forum. My name is Mike Colton. I'm superintendent of Pattonville School District, and I'm also a Bridgeton resident. We're glad you're here. Before we get started, just for fun, because I see lots of friends and neighbors, how many Bridgeton residents do we have here? Raise your hand here. Oh, fantastic. Thanks for coming out. And how about those of you who live in the Pattonville School District? How many of you are here?
Woo! Mom, you are.
All right, go Pirates. Bridgeton and Pattonville, for those of you that may not know, is a wonderful community. We love our community, we love our school districts, and we're proud of the fact that Pattonville is, in fact, the most diverse school district in the state of Missouri and one of the most diverse in the country, with 67 countries and 39 languages. Pattonville is a taste of what America looks like in its future. We're also high performing. When our kids leave, they're prepared for life. We recognize as educators, and we recognize as a community, that what we do today matters. It prepares the next generation to become the leaders of tomorrow. And we also recognize that maybe there were some decisions made in the past that weren't very good. And we're here tonight because of one of those. When radioactive waste ends up somewhere where it's not supposed to be, that's not a good thing. Not good for the community, not good for community health, but it can be fixed. Tonight is about you having an opportunity to share your thoughts about what we need to do to address the issue of Westside Landfill. We're so proud of the collaboration that brought tonight together. Just Moms, along with the Community Advisory Group, CAG, and the EPA have joined together to create a forum where you can come and share your voice. We're honored to have Kel Kelly from the EPA from Washington, D.C. to join us tonight. He's here to listen deeply to what you have to share. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate the EPA showing. Following some opening comments, Karen Nichols from Just Moms, along with Don Chapman from Just Moms, and Awesome Twosome, who are also wonderful parents in Pattonville, so thank you. Karen's going to help moderate. We do ask that as you share tonight that you be respectful in your comments. You know, the EPA is here to humbly listen and seek understanding as they work to find a safe, permanent solution to the Westside Landfill in cooperation with us as community members. So a part of the solution is hearing from you and engaging in civil discourse, where it contributes to the end result, which is addressing the safety issue at Westside Landfill in ways that not only provide perhaps some short or intermediate range solutions, but without question a long range solution for our community. And not just Bridgeton, not just Maryland Heights, but the entire St. Louis metropolitan area. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Karen. Thank you for being here. We're glad you're in Bridgeton and in Pattonville.
Thank you, Dr. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Kelly. He can give us a little brief statement here, and also Cathy Stepp.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Karen. I appreciate that. It's my pleasure and privilege to be here tonight. Again, my name is Albert Kelly. Everybody calls me Kel. That's because my mother she named me after my father, and they started calling me Little Albert. And we had Big Albert, Little Albert, and at an early age they decided that they didn't want me to be Little Albert, so she coined the name Kel. So that's where it came from. I usually have to explain that because where that comes from. So anyway, I'm delighted to be here today. This is I think the third time that I've been here to look at Westlake or have something to do with that. bring you greetings from Administrator Pruitt. I came to the EPA with him, known him for probably a quarter of a decade, or a quarter of a century, actually, 25 years. And I will tell you that he's committed to a solution. He's a man of action, somebody that wants to see results. In the process of the last 6 months, he has made Superfund, cleaning up Superfund sites very, very prominent. In his words, he's returning the EPA to its core mission. Its core mission is to protect health, protect the environment, and to protect the water that we drink, the air that we breathe. And so, if you have followed much of what he has said across the country, he continually comes back and focuses on the Westlake project. He expects there to be action there, and he's ready for it to be tomorrow. We spent a good deal of time today meeting with some of the city officials. We have had the opportunity to meet with some of the congressional representatives. Congresswoman Wagner gave us her opinions. We had staff from Congressman Lacey, Steve Engelberg, who's from here someplace, Jordan Fears from Congresswoman Wagner's office. They're both here today. And we know this is a bipartisan effort to see that something that's been here for 27 years is addressed. On far too long. We take no blame. We give no blame to anyone. We take responsibility. This is ours to clean up. It is ours to work with you to do so. And that's what we intend to do. Cathy Stepp is going to talk for a moment. Cathy is the acting regional administrator for Region 7, which is here. She has been, previous to this life, she was in Wisconsin and has an extensive environmental background. You're going to be very well served with Cathy's involvement, as with the rest of the really great professionals that we have here. I understand we're listening. Any questions that you have that are technical, we have our technical team that's going to be located in I guess it's next door in the open house room. So if you have technical issues, I'm not your right guy. But if you have issues that we need to hear about, believe me, tomorrow I'll be in Washington, D.C. I'll be reporting back to Administrator Pruitt. So again, he has shown, I think, some remarkable activity. Those of you that may have noticed, he has retained the authority to approve remedies of $50 million or more. Previously, that was delegated. He said, I want to be the one that approves those. I want to be the one that's the final selector. And so, the first one that he signed was 2 weeks ago when he elected to have the dioxin side of San Jacinto in Texas fully remediated and fully clean. And so we have high expectations, we have high purposes, and we look forward to working with all of you to effect a great solution here. A situation that's unfortunate, but is one that we need to take action to do. So we look forward to hearing from you, and at this point I want to turn it over to my co-board here, Cathy Stepp.
For inviting us to this event and giving me the opportunity to hear personally and share with you the stories, the observations, the experiences that all of you have had in this community over so many years now. As you heard, I am from the great state of Wisconsin, and I am new to EPA. I've only been here 6 weeks, but I spent the last 6.5 years as the Secretary of the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. And I was a former state legislator, involved very much in our Natural Resources and Environment Committee work, and then before then on a policy-making board for the DNR in Wisconsin. So I will say this, I had a lot of public meetings that were full of emotion and controversy and dire challenges that were in front of us as a state and as a community. But this topic area is a new one for me. So we didn't have to deal with this particular issue in our state of Wisconsin. We had other challenges, of course. So it's really my distinct honor and my humble privilege to be able to join all of you here tonight and to be able to hear from you and to learn from all of you. So thank you so much for allowing us this opportunity. I'd like to take one quick moment to ask all of our EPA staff that are here in this room tonight to please stand and be recognized so you can get a good look at the faces that are here joining you tonight, and again to plug our list for our opportunities later for interactions. So if you can say hello to all of our EPA staff that are joining us here tonight, please.
So next up, I want to introduce the new chair to the CAG group, which is the Community Advisory Group, Harvey Ferdman.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure to work with the EPA and the MOPS in setting this meeting up. You're probably wondering, what is a CAG? I'm going to read this from the EPA rules and regulations. According to the rules and regulations governing Superfund sites, a Superfund community advisory group is made up of members of the community and is designated to serve as the focal point for the exchange of information among the local community, the EPA, state regulatory agencies, and other pertinent federal agencies involved in the cleanup of the Superfund site. If you're interested in becoming a member of the CAG, please either contact me or email us at westlakecag@gmail.com. And again, I want to also point out there's a lot more EPA staff in the other room, as well as some state folks, and I want to thank all of you for taking the time to meet with us tonight.
Thank you, Harvey. So I know a lot of you already know I'm Karen Nickel, and this is Don Chapman. We're the co-founders of Just Moms STL, and we did help and co-host with EPA and with the CAG to put this on tonight because we felt it was very important for Mr. Kelly and Ms. Stepp here to hear from our community and learn what our community is all about. So, with that, welcome everyone here, and so glad that you are all here. We are here tonight because the prior EPA administrations have failed this community for decades. We now have new leadership. Through this new leadership, we have finally been given the opportunity for our community to be heard firsthand by Federal EPA Senior Advisor and Head of Superfund Task Force, Mr. Albert Kelly. So before we get started with the testimonies, I'd like to go over a few things. First of all, I will be calling up 3 speakers at a time. You will come up and sit in the chairs right up here next to the podium and wait your turn to speak. You will have 2 minutes to speak. You will see 3 minutes on the clock, but we are asking that you wrap it up in 2 minutes, and we use that extra minute to move you along and get the next speaker up. We have about 40 people signed up to speak tonight. If you signed up when you arrived, we promise we'll try to get you up here. We have time constraints, but we will do what we can. I know Mr. Kelly would like to hear from you, and we would as well. And I would also like to remind you that Mr. Kelly's role here tonight is to listen, not to respond or answer questions. As he pointed out earlier, we will have an open house over here. If you have technical questions that you would like to ask any of the agencies, I think you could probably find somebody from every agency over there. You can ask your technical questions over there. You can wait till the end of the night, or you can go over at your convenience. So, we're going to start off with the speakers, and I'm first. Okay. I just wanted to share with you my story and how I came about to get involved with this issue. I am a Coldwater Creek contaminated person, and I lived there most of my childhood. My parents had no idea we were being poisoned. So I am sick. I have several autoimmune diseases, and I went to a Foods Rep meeting 5 years ago only to learn that I also live 1.8 miles away from the Westlake Landfill. And for the past 20 years, I've been raising my own 4 children near a contaminated waste site, the same waste that came from Coldwater Creek. So I felt as though I didn't know that I was living this close again to this Superfund site, that many of my neighbors would not know that either. So I started the Westlake Landfill Facebook group. We have grown to over 18,000 people. We have the Just Moms STL Facebook group as well. Combined, we have about 22,000 people following us now. I just wanted you guys to know that for a mom that's sick and trying to raise 4 children and worry about whether they're going to get sick from my exposures and now living next to this landfill site, it takes a toll on you. And you worry about every time your child gets a headache or a cough, or, you know, we that have been exposed and contaminated have to worry about the big C and the cancer. So I just want you to know that I am going to go to the ends of the earth to protect my kids. And I will do everything I can. And what I really, really, really want you to know is do not let my kids be standing in this position 10 years from now. Because we have to do better. We just have to. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to call up the next 3. It's going to be Matt Lemanchi, Robin Daly, and Kirby Pemberton. So Matt, you can go ahead. Kirby, you want to sit right there? Okay.
Good evening. My name is Matt Lemanchi. I'm the Assistant Chief with the Pattonville Fire District. The Westlake Landfill is in our Fire Protection District. I apologize. I became aware of the situation at the Westlake Landfill approximately 6 years ago. And at that time, there wasn't a community group that was started. The issue that I was made aware of, I knew that we had a Superfund site in our Fire Protection District. What I wasn't aware of, that the record of decision from a few years earlier had not been implemented. I think this community deserves better from our federal agencies, our state agencies, and even our local agencies. The fact that Westlake is a nuclear waste dump is horrible in its own self. The fact that there's community members, people that live right adjacent to that area, for me, that's not acceptable. I should also go on to say that not only am I the Assistant Chief with the Pattonville Fire Protection District, I'm also the Chair of the Special Operations Team of St. Louis County, which encompasses urban search and rescue, swift water rescue, hazardous materials response, and technical rescue. My specialty of that is I'm the commanding officer for the hazardous materials response team. So it just kind of, by happen chance, this problem that we have at Westlake Landfill, being a hazardous materials toxic dump, landed right in my lap. Fortunately for the county, I feel somebody that had an understanding of dealing with hazardous materials was involved in what was going on. But getting back to my point about the Westlake landfill being a problem just in itself, the issue I was made aware of is that there was a fire burning in the adjacent landfill next to the nuclear waste. For 6 years now, my biggest concern has not only been for the community, the people that drive by the site on a daily basis, and we're talking hundreds of thousands of people, due to the intersections that we have, the 2 major intersections in St. Louis County of Highway 270 and Highway 70. But my concern was also for my firefighters, because we didn't have information, it was not provided to us what we were dealing with. And we've been responding to trash fires at the Bridgeton Landfill and the trash transfer station for years. I personally have been on more than I can count on 2 hands. Then we come to find out that we have an issue where the known radioactive material is not in the area where we were told it was. We still don't know exactly where the radioactive material is. We still don't know how close to the fire, and I'm going to call it a fire, because I want to say that I don't think it's fair for a company that has a lot of money to be able to attempt to buy their way out of scientific proof. You can't pay somebody to call it something. We had the term SSE, and now we hear SSR. And I will tell you, SSE and SSR are exactly what I deal with and have been dealing with in my career of now 27 years, that it is a fire.
Thank you, Matt. Robin Daly.
Mike and I are ground zero residents of Westlake Landfill since 1999. We looked forward to retiring in Bridgeton, but in 2012, our dreams of a happy retirement quickly became a nightmare that continues to this day. Our retirement has been disrupted, threatened daily through no fault of our own, but due to the actions and inactions of Region 7 and Republic Services. Republic is putting money and profits above our lives and health. We're just hardworking middle-class Americans who are trying to retire in peace and live with dignity. We're in the shadow of a disaster waiting to happen that won't allow us any peace. Day or night, always in the back of our minds, we worry. What will happen next at Westlake? Like more unreported surface fires, toxic leachate spills of thousands of gallons, radioactive runoff from heavy rain events. We begin every day with, which direction is the wind blowing? We can't open our homes and our windows at home or plan activities in our backyard because we not only fear the odor, but the toxins being released into our air on a daily basis through the gas flares. Mike has had to wear a respirator while hanging Christmas lights, headaches, nausea, difficulty breathing. This is our normal. This is our retirement. This isn't our fault. We thought we did everything right to achieve our American dream. Before 2012, we never heard of a Superfund site in St. Louis, let alone in Bridgeton. Westlake is the best kept dirty secret in the St. Louis region. We need relocation, excavation, buyout for full market home value, property assurance to protect our communities. Mike and I are living with 1,000 picocuries of thorium from Westlake. We made the hard decision to take matters into our own hands, have our home and property tested independently, and file a lawsuit against the responsible parties, since EPA never thought to test the nearest neighborhood for off-site contamination in the past 30 years. Well, Mike and I don't have another 30 years to wait for EPA to decide to do the right thing for us. Superfund is broken. We need the EPA to truly protect the people with relocation and excavation now.
Next up is Kirby Pemberton.
My name is Kirby Pemberton, and I was born in 1971 in Spanish Village and lived there until 1977. Then, within 5 miles away my entire life, attending Pattonville schools, playing ball and soccer at the contaminated BMAC, along with my children playing, and yes, my littles playing in the dirt as they grew up to play themselves. My daughter, Kirsty Pemberton, was diagnosed with a glioblastoma multiforme at the age of 8 and passed away at the age of 12, which is one of the tumors caused from ionizing radiation and is found in mainly 60-year-old men. My second daughter has infertility issues. She has not had a menstrual cycle since 2014. She's ready to get married and have babies. Does that seem possible? My third child, Cassidy. Boy, it's been quite a year. She's been hospitalized from February till July 17th of this year with depression, anxiety, and bipolar, which was the #1 thing on Dr. Khan's health survey when he went around to do a health survey. Then I have my youngest daughter, who has dinosaur teeth, literally dinosaur teeth that grow out from the middle of her mouth. This has affected my entire life. My husband had a grade 9 prostate cancer. I've had a hysterectomy. I've had lumps taken out of me the size of baseballs. This has ruined my entire life. This needs to be cleaned up. It's time to help us. It's time.
Next up, we need Brianna McCormick, Megan Beckerman, and Tanya Mason, please.
Hi, my name is Brianna McCormick, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this evening. I lived for 10 years in Spanish Village neighborhood, beginning in 2007, when I moved in with my future husband, whom had already owned the home. I was excited to start our lives together and make this house our home. After a few years, we had 2 children. While one of my children was an infant, I learned about the subsurface smoldering event and later the radioactive waste. Imagine holding a baby while reading about benzene in the air or radioactive waste less than a mile away from your house. Unfortunately, I don't have to imagine. I've lived it. It's hell. For years, I have attended mom's meetings, CAG's meetings, and taken several trips to Jeff City. During these times, I've waited for my voice to be heard, as well as voices that are much louder and much more active than my own. But from these people, in this awful situation, we don't feel like we've been heard. Given the length of time we're in this situation, I have incredible fear of what will happen to my family's health. Not only have we been there so long, but I was also pregnant with both of my children when this began. My understanding is exposure to unborn children is much more harmful than to grown people. My family suffers from such ailments including low muscle tone, a language disorder, asthma, epilepsy, eczema, Meniere's disease, low liver function, and severe dermatitis. I think it is important to note that none of these ailments occurred before we were in this home and we were diagnosed with them in this home. However, I know this is just the iceberg. Now, just like my Coldwater Creek friends experienced, I worry about what's to come. What long-term effects will we experience in 10, 20 years? Will we be one of the unlucky ones to have some rare cancer down the road? I know it may seem far-fetched to worry about exposure when a government agency is telling you everything is fine and there's nothing off-site. But I don't feel everything is fine, and I know there is off-site contamination. I've watched water fall down a radioactive hill into a sewer ditch. I've had my home tested by a reputable law firm that has found high levels of radiation in the vacuum cleaner, radium. Imagine looking at your carpet, having flashbacks of your babies crawling on it after being told that there's radium in it. Hell just continues to get hotter. My reason for telling you these stories are very simple. You have the power to do something. The people of this community deserve to feel like their agency has their back and is not just worried about the bottom line. I implore you to do the right thing and to relocate the community as well as for entire excavation of this site. Thank you.
Good evening. I am the mother of 3 beautiful children. We live less than 2 miles from Westlake Landfill. My oldest, my 16-year-old son, was born and raised further away from the landfill. He is healthy, and I thank God every day for that. My 8-year-old Trevor was also born further away from the landfill. But then we moved here, less than 2 miles from the landfill, before he was 1 year old. Trevor has an extremely rare form of alopecia universalis. It has caused him to lose all of the hair on his body, which has never grown back. To me, this is his body's way of calling out for help. He also has had to have surgery to correct respiratory problems. My youngest, my daughter, Faith, was my only child that was conceived in our current home here. Unfortunately, we lost her in a miscarriage during my second trimester of pregnancy 3 months ago. The worst day of my life. I was able to hold her, and she was perfect on the outside, but God only knows what harm the contamination from this Superfund site did to her on the inside. The second worst day of my life was when I found out my home is less than 2 miles away from a leaking, burning, radioactive landfill. After moving here, the puzzles began to fit together. My neighbors, 2 directly across from me and 1 directly next door, all died of cancer. The nauseating smells when I open our windows or take our kids to the park are overwhelming. Then came the warnings from our schools telling us to consider stockpiling prescription meds at school and asking us to prepare our children to shelter in place at school for an indefinite period of time. We had to explain that Mommy and Daddy would not be allowed inside the school and that the kids would not be allowed to leave the school until the fire department says the air is okay to breathe. Oh, and then there's also the notices from the state of Missouri suggesting that I tell my children that they can't play outside when they smell the landfill because the odors can make them sick. Knowing that the underground fire is not capable of being controlled and that the landfill has never been completely tested to find out exactly where all the radioactive waste is, this creates such high levels of anxiety, fear, and stress beyond measure. There is nothing you can do at this site that doesn't require digging. Therefore, you must relocate the residents. We need relocation and excavation.
Next up is Tommy Mason. I would also like Bob Nellen, Kathy Bell, and Jan Huber to come up, please, and sit in the waiting seats.
I stand here with so many different emotions running through me. Anger that our government that is supposed to protect us is failing us. Guilt for choosing to buy our home in Spanish Village for our family. Hatred for a company that is more concerned with money and profit than our lives. Disgust that the same company brags about the money they spend trying to fool the community into thinking it is safe, but refuses to relocate the families of Spanish Village and give us our lives back. Fear of what my daughters, grandchildren, and the rest of my family may have been and are still being exposed to in my very own home. Helplessness because I cannot sell my home to another family to put them through what my family has had to endure for over 5 years, and hopelessness because there's nothing I can do. I don't get to enjoy holidays at my home with my children and grandchildren. What I would give to see my grandbabies looking for Easter eggs in my yard. Instead, I watch videos of them at their other grandma's house. We don't buy Halloween candy to hand out to excited children who wants to walk their kids in our neighborhood. Every year, a debate as to whether or not to put up a Christmas tree. No one will be coming over to my house to enjoy it. This is the life we have been forced to live because of corporate neighbors that don't care about this community or what they have taken from us. At the last meeting you hosted, there was a presentation that included lies that the odors have pretty much gone away. I would like to see scientific proof of that because I am living proof that that information was absolutely false and misleading. This community deserves more respect than that. Someone please explain to me the rationale of leaving mass amounts of radioactive material here at Westlake Landfill, but yet Army Corps of Engineers is cleaning out residues of this exact same radioactive material at and around Coldwater Creek for the safety of those communities.
It feels as if Republic Services are the puppet masters and EPA are the puppets. There is no paycheck high enough to get me to stand in a room full of these families and lie to them and tell them that this site is safe. The lives of the families surrounding this site matter. I have been asking and begging for over 4 years to have the ground that is currently burning in the South Quarry be tested for radioactive material, to be continuously told no. What are you afraid you'll find? How can you lie and tell this community that the radioactive material is 700 feet from the fire when you have refused to test closer to the fire? I do not understand why a government agency that is supposed to protect us refuses to be proactive and would rather be reactive. What this community deserves is relocation and total excavation. Thank you.
If I could, I'd like to go ahead and make a comment for just a moment. And certainly everybody that we've heard from, I want you to know I'm taking notes and we're sorry, but that doesn't get very far. One of the things that we discussed today, and we communicated this, I want you to know that we have decided that we're going to evaluate and increase the area that needs to be tested, because there is this you just laid out, which is we don't, there's the belief that we don't know what's there. Even though we believe we characterize it properly, we're going to go ahead and test additional areas. We're going to work with CAG to see that we test in areas that are of concerns to you all, so that we have not left something undone. I didn't say this in my opening, but we are progressing very rapidly in getting to solutions. I believe that Region 7 has published all of the reports, all of the feasibility studies today, all the comments today on our website. We will be discussing, presenting this in its first draft to the administrator the first part of November. It will then go on to National Revenue Review Board and a little bit later in November, which also the CAG will be able to make comments to that Revenue Review Board. So we are anxious to hear everybody's comments. There's no way that my words can in any way give you back the things that you've lost. And I understand that. But what we are trying to do is be very proactive and not get half of a solution, but get to a solution. And we want you to know that that is a solemn pledge, and we are not going to slow down. We're moving as rapidly as we can and moving in a direction that has a good record that will allow us to defend that record and to take the entirety of this remediated in a way that is going to make it safe so that you all believe that it's safe. And I know those are only words. That is where we're at. And I appreciate everybody's comments. And I thought I should comment when you talk about trying to test in other areas. We're going to do that.
I think that we will take that as a victory for this right now.
Mr. Kelly and Kathy and all the other dignitaries, so we thank you for being here tonight and for listening to those who have to speak. My name is Bob Nallon. My wife Jean and I have lived in Spanish Village since June of 1977. In those 40 years, we've raised our 3 children, and we have grandchildren and great-grandchildren who also visit us. So we have major concerns about what has happened, is happening, and will happen at Westlake and Bridgeton landfills. We were not aware of what had been and was being dumped in the landfills when we bought our house. We were not aware of the radioactive materials that had been dumped there until we attended a public meeting in 2013, right here in the Machinist Hall, regarding the odors from the underground fire at the Bridgeton landfill. And we were also told then that there was radioactivity in adjoining landfill. Shortly after that, I became involved by helping to establish the Community Advisory Group, or CAG, and I have been involved since then. I have not talked with any other Spanish Village residents who have owned their homes more than 5 years who were aware before that 2013 date of of the radioactivity at Westlake Landfill, nor were any of us aware of the 2008 Record of Decision. EPA did not establish a CAG for the 2008 ROD as was required by the Superfund law. Health problems potentially caused by landfill emissions our immediate family members are experiencing include colon and breast cancer, autoimmune diseases, liver diseases, digestive, thyroid, and various other respiratory diseases, and who knows what else might come up. The questions I have are about relocation of nearby residents and perhaps businesses during the time that the selected remedy takes place. I understand that all 4 remedies being considered require digging up some of the soil and therefore would necessitate relocation of at least nearby residents for various lengths of time. As part of each option being considered, did they calculate how long the relocation would be for each alternative and what the cost of each would be? Due to a lawsuit by the Missouri Attorney General, we were relocated in 2013 for 2 weeks when they just dug up some pipes in the Bridgeton Landfill. Relocation and excavation may seem like the most difficult and expensive alternative, but if the ongoing monitoring and maintenance and temporary relocations are considered, that could change. Has the cost of buyout for at least Spanish Village, the mobile home park, and other houses within a 2-mile radius of the Westlake Landfill been calculated and compared to the cost of never-ending monitoring and maintenance that would have to be a part of the other options? Relocation and total evacuation is the only permanent solution. Do you want the residents and businesses of this St. Louis area to be saddled forever with health and quality of life concerns and issues?
Thank you. Next up is Dr. Bell.
Mr. Kelly, thank you for being here. I know it's kind of a big deal for you to come here from Washington, D.C. I'm here to tell you the Westlake Landfill is also kind of a big deal. I ask that you listen to us with an open heart. I live in Spanish Village, less than a half mile from the Westlake Landfill. I live in fear. Fear of another surface fire at the landfill. Fear of the underground fire reaching the radioactive waste in the adjoining landfill. And fear that that has already happened. Fear of having to be evacuated at any time, or being told that we have to shelter in place. Fear of the many toxins that we are forced to breathe in and the health effects that those toxins will have on us. You see, I grew up near Coldwater Creek in Hazelwood, where these same leftover Manhattan Project weapons wastes contaminated the creek. I never played in the creek, but my older brother did, totally unaware of the toxins he was being exposed to. As an adult, he battled many forms of cancer for over 15 years. He underwent countless surgeries, radiation, and chemo treatments. He lost his battle 3 weeks ago tomorrow. In my heart, I know that his cancers were caused by his exposure to the radioactive wastes in Coldwater Creek. The same wastes that were illegally dumped in the Westlake landfill in 1973. These radioactive wastes need to be removed and the entire site remediated. Those of us that live next to the Westlake landfill need to be relocated, as we do not want to sell our house to another family and put them in this horrible situation. No one should live this close to a Superfund site. So I'm asking you, please, remove the wastes, relocate the people. It's the right thing to do for this community.
Thank you, Cathy. Next up is Dan Hoover, County Usry, Randy Hine, and Paige Christador to come up.
Hello, and thank you very much for listening to our concerns. I'm here this evening to tell you what Westlake Landfill is to me. It's a thief. It has stolen my peace of mind, my golden years, good friends, and wonderful neighbors. It has stolen my health, and above all else, my joy. What this deadly landfill has given me is stress, insomnia, anxiety, blinding headaches, sinus problems, breathing issues, frustration, and even anger. By far the most devastating thing it has given me is guilt and overwhelming heartache. I may have unknowingly exposed my 3-year-old granddaughter to radioactive waste. It has come to my attention that radioactive contamination has been discovered a mile from Westlake Landfill. I live 1 mile from Westlake. Try to imagine that cold and dark fear for a moment. Although my years are waning, hers are merely beginning. Please protect her and allow her a complete and fulfilling life. She may return the favor someday and save your life. This room must be removed completely. There is no other solution. And may I suggest to the mayor of Bridgeton that he have City Hall tested. Please give the residents of Bridgeton the greatest gift possible, peace of mind, and thank you. Relocation and excavation.
Good evening. My name is Connie Estrie. I'm a lifetime resident of Maryland Heights. I live 1.88 miles from Westlake Landfill. I come from a large family. Many of my family members suffer from immune deficiencies and autoimmune disorders, such as MS and rheumatoid arthritis. 4 of my children and I have asthma. Headaches and migraines are a daily occurrence in our household. Over the years, I've watched family members and friends of all ages get sick. Sick with brain tumors, breast cancers, leukemias, lupus, birth defects, and other serious illnesses. I've been to too many funerals. I worry about this burning landfill every single day. My husband is the battalion for a local fire department. I worry about him when he is on duty. Fires, car accidents, and water rescues happen in our community daily. Every day, our first responders risk their lives to keep us safe. I live knowing that on any given day, the tones could ring and my husband, along with his crew, could have to respond to an emergency situation like no other, a burning radioactive landfill. And that scares me, and that's not okay with me. You can see flames. You cannot see radioactive particles. Radioactive particles do not have a color. When you see a fire, you call 911. Fire trucks come, the fire gets put out, and the danger's gone. We have radioactive materials in our community, radioactive particles in our air, in our soil, and in our houses. Tons and tons of radioactive waste sits in a landfill less than 2 miles from my home. I've attended these meetings for years. I've read the reports, I've signed the petitions, I've made the calls, and I've seen the movie. And the danger is still here. Why? I want to know why it is okay for radioactive waste to be in a community full of families like mine. Right now, I should be at my 8-year-old soccer practice. I should not have to be here fighting for the right to live in a safe environment. I ask you to please consider relocation and excavation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly and Ms. Stepp, for being here this evening with us. My reason for speaking to you this evening is to try and impose the urgency for full remediation of the radioactive material at Westlake Landfill. I've got two stories to convey to you. The first one is of a personal nature. 4 years ago today, my father passed away from complications of MDS, myelodysplastic syndrome. It's a bone marrow disorder. It's likened to pre-leukemia. Our bone marrow is what produces our platelets, and our platelets coagulate our blood. So what was the cause of this? I've identified two possible sources. After the material was dumped or stored along Coldwater Creek in 1946, my father was at the age where he played in the creek. And then I'm third generation running the family business, income tax and accounting business, which my grandmother started in 1946, and my father ran until 4 years ago when he passed away. Our office happened to be in the office building that was owned by Bobby and Kenny Davis. B&K Construction Company, you might recognize that name. They were contracted by the Cotter Corporation to move the material from along the airport site and over on Laddie Avenue out to Westlake Landfill. Back then, windows in the office were open because of lack of air conditioning or just wanting a breeze to come through during the day. And I remember being in the office as a kid, the dump trucks coming back at the end of their workday and hosing out the beds, and the water would flow onto the ground, into the open creek next to our office at the time. It has since been enclosed. Now I ask you, is this a cause of the MDS, or is it just coincidence? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. I shouldn't have to be asking this question. My second story I want to relate to you is as an elected official with the city of Bridgeton. I'm a councilman, Ward 3. Back in 2013, we had a developer come in and propose a development, 565 acres. A year later, we heard no more information from him. I asked the mayor to contact him. The mayor did, and here's the response that he got. Dear Mayor, you and certain council members are correct. The landfill activities are related adverse publicity limit the ability to properly market and promote the site. Nevertheless, we remain very interested and committed to this site and the city of Bridgeton. So not only health issues, health violations, but also economic violations to the city of Bridgeton. 44 years is long enough. I asked for full remediation and asked for a buyout of houses within a certain radius around the city and the landfill. Thank you.
Can we get Maggie Wayne, Steve Tashler, and George Holvis up, please?
My name is Paige, and I'm 10 years old. I am a 4th grader at Belring Elementary. Karen is my aunt. She has been babysitting me since I was 2 years old. Over the years, the landfill smell has been getting worse. Karen has taken me to see the landfill. We wear masks, and the landfill looks like it's sinking. One time I was playing with my cousin Marissa. It was winter time, and we were playing in the snow. We had to wear masks because the smell was very bad. When Karen is babysitting me, sometimes she takes me to the landfill. Sometimes it makes my eyes itch and gives me a headache. Karen often misses family functions because the landfill has affected her health. Please move the families away from the landfill. It is hurting my family and friends and making them sick.
My name is Maggie Wang, and I'm a student at Washington University in St. Louis, originally from Los Angeles. Before I came to St. Louis, I had never heard of the Westlake landfill or the Bridgeton landfill fire. I matriculated at college believing what they had promised us, that college is a place where we would always be safe. I first learned about the Westlake landfill from a campus panel where Dawn and Karen spoke, and when I did further research, I was shocked. Here was illegally dumped nuclear waste 20 minutes from where I lived, and that had been there since the 1970s, and was just accepted as safe because no one had grown a third head yet. The truth is, the EPA didn't want to know whether it was safe or not because they didn't want the problem to be bigger than it was. They would much rather dismiss the extraordinary rate of health concerns from the residents as unrelated or coincidental, and would much rather label any untested areas as free of nuclear contamination. I have witnessed the levels of stress and pain that Dawn and Karen and other residents like them live with every day. They don't want to be constantly thinking about this landfill and fighting drawn-out legal and bureaucratic battles. They are sacrificing time with their families, time out of their own lives because they have to, because this is a real issue, because it affects them, because it affects their children, and because it affects me. As a resident of St. Louis, I cannot stand by and watch my neighbors suffer. I know friends and mentors who come from the contaminated areas such as Coldwater Creek, whose lives have been affected by mishandling of this radioactive waste. I know that air quality issues, such as those from the Bridgeton Landfill fire, don't just affect those closest to them. We all breathe the same air. I know that if the Bridgeton fire were to meet the landfill's known contaminated areas, the entire St. Louis County would be affected. Myself and other students from Washington University are not removed from this issue. We will continue to stand with Just Moms and the community members. This issue is the issue of our generation and future generations to come. I will not accept any solution for this community other than relocation of the residents and a full excavation of the site. Thank you.
I'm going to jump ahead. Steve's a little bit under the weather on it. My name is George Hovis. I actually followed it. And by followed it, I started out in the city, right by Mallinckrodt, my family. My first kiss was a little girl whose family father worked for Mallinckrodt. She died of leukemia, so did her father. I then luckily moved out of that area and moved into Ferguson, in the Florissant area, right near the airport. And then from there, you know, I moved even further, closer to Westlake. Before I get too far in, I want to make sure I thank some people. I definitely want to thank you guys for coming out. I want to thank Albert Kelly. Thank you, sir. I want to thank Scott Pruitt, because I know you're going to take our message back to him. I'd like to obviously thank you, Cathy Stepp, and the Kent Group, and of course the Just Moms. Without this, I'd have no clue what was going on. I just thought it was a bad roll of the dice. It's a repetitive thing, the stories that I'm hearing in here. In addition to, I'd like to thank the Army Corps of Engineers, I'd like to thank the scientists, I'd like to thank the engineers, and all the soldiers who have gone out and fought in World War II and effectively did the Manhattan Project and allowed us to end the war early and save American lives. I would also like to thank the secret soldiers within this room that continue the fight for the last several decades. You put your life on the line day in and day out with the mess that's been left behind. I want to thank you, sir, for taking our message back. I want to thank you for making the necessary changes. I looked at the 4 proposals, and some of them don't make sense to me. The no action, I think we're past that, obviously. The other one was the cap. I call it the shower cap syndrome. You know, you put a shower cap on, but you sit in the bathtub, it doesn't do much good. And that stuff winds up in our drinking water, and it continues on and on. The third option was partial removal. Wow, that's an idea. Partial removal. We'll cut out a portion of your cancer and leave the rest to fester. That doesn't seem too reasonable to me. Then I have a couple more concerns that I want you to take back, because we've got this great big large area, and you know, there's a lot of radioactive material, and no one said, hey, what if Mr. Crazy comes along? Not that we have any bad people in the world, but what if someone flew a plane into it? I asked them the other room, I don't know, no one ever asked that question. I said, you know, what happens if someone drills a hole and causes an explosion and plumes that stuff into the air? What's the plan for that? How many security individuals do we have watching this 8-foot fence? You know, what are we doing? I didn't even know this existed until these wonderful moms brought it to our attention. When you take our message back, talk about our secret soldiers. Talk about the woman I met at Kohl's whose father worked for Mellencrot, and he worked the midnight shift. So he would drive the barrels out to the airport. He'd drive the barrels out on the midnight shift, and when his badge would fill, they'd say, oh, give me that. And they'd give him a fresh one. You know, they used to pull the metal out of his ear and send it in and wrap it in aluminum foil to be analyzed. You know, these are the secret soldiers, and yes, it was a necessity, and I get that. But like all soldiers, when we come home from battle, when those soldiers come home, we got to take care of them. These are our soldiers in this room. These are our soldiers in this area, and they need to be taken care of as well. Thank you so much for your time.
Next up, I want to call up Alex Cohen, Lindy Bearhoff, and Bill Otto.
Hello. I'm yielding my time to those that should be here, but cannot be here because exposure to our city's legacy radioactive waste has stolen their lives and or their health. I want to ask my community to help me in remembering those names and lifting those voices up. I'm going to move my hand across the room in a circular motion. As my hand moves across the room past you, I ask you to speak those names out loud for the whole room to hear. If it's yourself, say your name. If it's someone you love that's sick because they were exposed to this waste, please say that. At the same time, raise your hand and leave your hand up for the remainder of my time. And at the end, I'm going to ask that we take a moment of silence to honor those people.
Karen. Debbie and Doug.
John and James. Clifford Cruz. John and Dorothy. Mike
John,
Larry.
Kirsty.
Karen Williams.
Mia. Jennifer Smith.
Kristen Camuso.
Lori. Mary.
Mr. Kelly, remember these names, remember these hands, remember these faces. Remember that you have the power to end this grim legacy with relocation and excavation.
Up next is Lindy Bearhoff.
Well, thank you. Before I was born, for a number of months in 1973, my father helped to build a building on Laddie Avenue. That summer, there seemed to him to be a lot of construction nearby, except at a very strange lot roughly across the street, where workers were doing the opposite. They were taking material away. Full, open dump trucks bounced from the Laddie site. The drivers had their faces and their clothing caked with dust. It was all over them. They had sweat on their faces. Those trucks were on their way to Westlake, carrying radioactive residues down roads that took them right past where others were working and where people were living. A little more than a decade later, in the 1980s, growing up as a child, so much radioactive material remained that my brother and I believed our area was very special. As children, we knew that our weekly family drives to the airport to watch planes also took us past things that other people didn't have.
We had remnants of atomic bomb production in our neighborhood. Our neighborhood had stuff from the bomb and other people didn't. My brother would roll down the backseat window and claim that he had been thoriated, and this became our routine. As children, we thought that was kind of silly and funny. As an adult, that makes me very sad and angry. I have never known a time when my understanding of home has been separable from the realities of radioactive waste. In the 1980s, I grew up amid fierce battles as city and county officials argued over responsibility for contamination. Would St. Louis City be stuck with a cleanup cost for a federal weapons program? Would the St. Louis Airport end up hosting a permanent radioactive waste disposal site? Does the St. Louis area have a cancer spike? And there have been many subsequent studies since the 1980s on that topic. And then came the related questions from St. Charles County. Is the abandoned uranium production site at Weldon Spring dangerous? What about radioactive runoff and high schoolers reportedly swimming in a radioactive quarry? Throughout all of these controversies, federal officials also knew that the Westlake landfill contained contamination, and they responded with silence and with surveys. Studies of Westlake have mounted 1982, 1988, past the turn of the millennium. I attended my first EPA meeting about Westlake landfill in 2006. 11 years later, we are gathered here again to hear questions, feelings, and concerns as they might be expressed by the residents. To date, our legacies of contamination, as they are sometimes referenced, have been the subject of 3 feature films, countless news stories, and still other academic works. We have been a major focal point of action under federal legislation to help workers harmed by nuclear weapons production. But these legacies have also been lived by the people that I care about deeply, by some as stench and frustration and jurisdictional confusions, by some as lifetimes expended in the search for remedies that never seem complete or enough, and finally as illnesses and empty chairs and empty hearts, and some of those have been in my own family. Inevitably, our legacies are our questions. How can we lift up our neighbors and our friends and members of the public who continually bear these burdens of the past so unfairly and for too long and without sufficient help? And how will you, as the latest generation of public officials, respond to the legacy that is now your responsibility? And we will all live with the answers. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I went a little bit.
Good evening, my name is Bill Otto, and I wanted to address a concern that comes up quite often around here in regard to the landfill, and that's bird activity. I'm a 31-year veteran, air traffic control veteran, learned my craft in the Navy, and I applied that craft here at Lambert Airport for more than 20 years. In the late 80s, you might not know this, but I'm sure it's a source of pride here, we were the 6th busiest airport in the country. We were the 2nd busiest airport of any airport in the world for wheels on the ground compared to square foot of runway. We did this on 2 runways back then. We handled traffic, of course we're great now. The innovative processes that we developed back then eventually ended up being used around the world. The air traffic control facility, air traffic controllers at Lambert Airport are second to none, and I'm here to assure you of that. But 2 things always remain the same. The south runway, the runway closest to the landfill, is runway headed, never turned over to the landfill, never has, and never will. It's based on noise abatement, and it's based on traffic flow. And the other thing that's always been there is the Bridgeton Landfill. In the 80s when we started, when the airport was building up so as quickly as it was, when the traffic numbers were building up, the landfill was an active landfill. They put new dirt, new trash in there every day, which brought new birds. And every night they covered it up with dirt. That was the daily process. We knew that, we understood that, we knew when the birds would be most active, we knew how to protect that. And they do now as well. Of course, the changes that have occurred since then is we have a new runway. And the new runway is the only region the airport is encroached within the boundaries of the landfill. And I understand it's only about 500 foot, which is incremental, considering air traffic control rules and rules that the airport run by. This landfill there, the landfill as it sits in the way the runways sit, the new runway is only northwest departures and southeast landings. It is a very, very small portion of time where traffic is even on that runway. It is a poorly designed runway, one of the many reasons why traffic is down. Traffic now at Lambert Airport is somewhere between 25 and 33% of what it was in the 80s. A third of what it was. Air traffic controllers now understand the process. The bird activity, if there is any, will certainly be mitigated by the airport, and the air traffic controllers will work around it. They'll work around it as they did natural disasters, traffic flow, and construction, which is a part of an airport, as you all know, forever. We live by two words as controllers, that is safe and expeditious. I assure you we get you to your landing spot as quickly as possible, understanding that the most important thing in the world is your safety. I would like you to both consider using those words here, safe and expeditious. If we can get these folks away from this landfill as safely and expeditiously as possible, I assure you they'll all be grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill.
Hello, Mr. Kelly. My name is Izzy Richmond, and I'm a freshman in high school. I was diagnosed with asthma a few months after moving to Maryland Heights in 2010. It was terrifying, gasping for breath, and air being stolen from me, and desperately trying to find my rescue in there. People at school would get terrible nosebleeds all the time, and it would be normal to see a classmate get one on the outside the gym. I moved away in 2015, and I had just began middle school. It's quite difficult to explain to a group of 6th graders that I have to leave because it's unsafe. Leaving my friends behind was one of the hardest things I had ever had to do. But what are you supposed to do when your life could be at risk? It's not just the landfill. It's not just in the landfill, it's everywhere. It's in the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the dirt people's children play. My mom was diagnosed with thyroid cancer on March 17, 2013. She has had to go through several surgeries, and her thyroid, gallbladder, and left adrenal gland were taken out, along with a full hysterectomy in a span of 11 months. She now has a tumor on her right adrenal gland and a lesion on her liver. As a 4th grader, I didn't understand the gravity of what was happening. All I knew was that Mom is sick, or she has to go to the doctors for a day or two. She didn't want to outright tell me, a child, that she had cancer. It also took a toll on me, seeing my own mother sick in bed for months and not even understanding why. But through all this, she is a fighter. She still works with the moms every day and fights for this mess to be cleaned up. Just to be told that their fighting means nothing to EPA Region 7 and Public Services. It is people like my mom and I that we will be helping if you remove your radioactive waste. People are dying because nothing is being done, and we shouldn't have to live in fear because of the careless act made 44 years ago. I am grateful that I was able to move away, but what about the people who are stuck here? These people need to be relocated, and the radioactive waste needs to be removed. Thank you.
My name is Kate Dry. I live in University City. I'm here tonight to urge our federal government, specifically the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, to remove the world's oldest radioactive waste from the Missouri River floodplain. As most of you here tonight know, Mallinckrodt Chemical Works near downtown St. Louis processed all the uranium that went into the world's first nuclear chain reaction and into the atom bombs that were exploded, marking the end of World War II. For all but 2 of my 84 years, I have lived in St. Louis, the town where the most long-lived radioactive wastes of the atomic age were generated, starting in 1942, as the crucial ingredient of America's atom bombs. Because of the brilliance of atomic scientists and the bravery and sacrifice of many, many Americans, we were able to win World War II. But as all of us here tonight recognize, we are still faced today with the extremely dangerous, virtually permanent radioactive waste from those bombs and that war. Americans have finally been discovering and cleaning up the radioactive wastes that were produced, generated, and dispersed as a part of the production of the world's earliest atom bombs. Excuse me. I am certain that virtually everyone here tonight shares the goal of finding, removing, and finally isolating these long-lived radioactive wastes. Uranium-238 and its daughter products have been dispersed in our St. Louis neighborhoods, especially here in North St. Louis County. Uranium-238 has a half-life of 4.5 billion years, that's with a B. It will remain dangerous for 10 times that long. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has been digging up and shipping away nuclear weapons waste from downtown St. Louis and from North St. Louis County for disposal. But many of us are here tonight specifically to urge the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to be given the responsibility to remove the radioactive weapons waste from the Westlake landfill. The landfill is in the Missouri River floodplain, upstream from some of the major drinking water sources of St. Louis. I'm submitting 2 sets of an extremely important series of articles about our St. Louis radioactive waste that appeared in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch in 1989. All of us who are here tonight need to work together to make certain that the long-lived nuclear weapons wastes are removed from North St. Louis County and to work together toward the goal of never again. Thank you.
Carolyn Bauer. Could I get Beth Smith, Helene Slavin, and Lori Sabansky up, please?
Carolyn Bauer. 3 decades ago, I wrote about the history of uranium processing and the legacy of the radioactive waste in the St. Louis region, including at Westlake. Many of the sites, Mallinckrodt, Airport, Laddie, Weldon Spring, have been cleaned up. Westlake has not. The wastes at Westlake are the same radionuclides. Thorium-230, radium-226, uranium-238, uranium-235 at the sites cleaned up. But the strange thing is, Westlake's going to become more radioactive because of the way the uranium was processed. There's extra thorium, the decay products, the radium will become hotter over the coming years, and as the materials decay. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission in 1988 said the radioactive waste at Westlake represent a significant long-term hazard and, quote, will likely require moving the material to a carefully designed and constructed disposal cell, unquote. The radioactive waste at Westlake have migrated off-site to air, soil, plants, groundwater. The Missouri River aquifer is one of the most important aquifers in the state, one we cannot afford to have contaminated. The Missouri River is a source of water for many people in our region. I live in St. Louis County and drink that water. Putting a cap made from clay, rocks, rubble over the radiation-contaminated areas in an unlined landfill will not prevent future migration of radionuclides. The water table of the Missouri River floodplain is shallow. It fluctuates according to the river level and rain runoff. It's not a question of a levee. It percolates up. At my house, we got 12 inches of rain in 24 hours. Our basement flooded. It comes up. Everybody's basement floods. In addition, underground fire, the EPA's Office of Research and Development has said that fire in the radioactive zone could present long-term risks, including the escape of radon gas into the air at, quote, levels of concern. We are entitled to have these radioactive wastes removed now from the heavily populated area. A July 1989 study for the NRC said there is a long-term potential for this radioactive material at Westlake to pose a health problem. So even if you see no health risk right now, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has said in the long run it will be. Solving the problem is vital for our economic health and for our well-being of all the people who live and work here. All of us, men, women, and children, depend on clean land, clean air, clean water. Please excavate and relocate.
Hello, my name is Ed Smith. I work for the Missouri Coalition for the Environment. Our organization was involved in the proposed remedy and record of decision process during the first go-round, if you will, before we knew about the smoldering fire. I just want to make sure that people know that this is an issue our organization has been focused on for a considerable amount of time, especially with the help of K-Dry. If it weren't for her, I don't think any of us would be here right now. So, yeah. So the EPA's proposed remedy should call for full removal of the radioactive waste at the Westlake landfill. The federal government never designed or permitted or authorized the landfill to contain this type of forever toxic waste. The U.S. Department of Energy kept it from rightfully becoming a FUSRAP site in 1990, which is why we're here talking to the EPA instead of the Corps of Engineers. It must also be noted that the EPA's 2008 proposal to cap and leave the radioactive waste never considered any kind of fire, smoldering, or surface a threat to the radioactivity or mobilizing it into our human environment. While the radioactivity at Westlake may be low level by legal definition, it's quite radioactive according to the EPA's own approved tests at the site. Thorium is more than 10,000 times above cleanup action levels, radium is more than 380 times above cleanup levels, and uranium is more than 15 times above cleanup levels. Those are just some numbers I found preparing my testimony for tonight. In fact, the radium will actually become up to 100 times more radioactive, as we've heard here tonight, for the next 9,000 years. The river is going to change course over the next 9,000 years, I can guarantee it. Choosing to leave this material at an unlined landfill in the Missouri River floodplain is just as bad of an idea as it was to dump it there in the first place. Weldon Spring is just across the Missouri River in St. Charles County. Before the radioactivity was dumped at Westlake, the owner of the material asked to ship it to the Weldon Spring site in St. Charles. That request was denied because the United States Geological Survey found the radioactivity to be too risky to dump into the Weldon Spring quarry. From Cotter Corporation, quote, "The United States Geological Survey forbade the dumping of sledges, processed or not, into the quarries in question because of the high probability of contaminating the Missouri River shortly above the intakes of the St. Louis City and St. Louis County water supplies." So what they do, they dumped it in a different unlined quarry in the Missouri River floodplain. The thing that separates Westlake from Weldon, other than just a little bit of difference in a different county in the river, is the fact that the radioactive material that was dumped at a quarry at Weldon was removed, and the DOE cites the removal not because of concern for it actually impacting the well field there, but due to community concern for drinking water. The remediation was done adjacent to a high school. It's hard to imagine a more vulnerable population than young people, yet the DOE was able to encase the radioactive material at the Weldon site. Lastly, although MCE would like to see the radioactive material at Weldon removed, the Weldon site has a liner and was engineered for 1,000 years. Placing a cap at the Westlake landfill is far less protective than the final decision at Weldon, and the only way to ensure the radioactive material doesn't further mingle with the groundwater is to remove it. Thank you.
Greetings, and thank you for being here. I am reading this statement on behalf of my husband, Stuart Slavin, who's had a long-standing commitment and could not make this meeting. His name is Stuart Slavin. I am a physician, professor of pediatrics at SLU School of Medicine, and I have dedicated my professional life to working to improve and ensure the health and well-being of children, adolescents, and young adults. When I first heard about Westlake, I thought, like many others, that someone must be handling this problem. The more I've learned, the more I realize this is blatantly not the case. That nothing has been done to truly address this problem completely boggles my mind. That debate continues about what to do is incomprehensible to me, given what I believe to be are the well-established facts. Facts. The Westlake landfill lies in a former quarry in Bridgeton, Missouri. In 1973, huge amounts of radioactive material dating to the Manhattan Project were illegally dumped there. Much of the material is alleged to be low-level radioactive material, but evidence exists that large amounts of more dangerous waste is mixed in, including highly toxic radionuclides such as thorium-230, radium-223, uranium-235, and lead-210. The landfill is unlined and sits on a porous aquifer in a floodplain less than 2 miles from the Missouri River, upstream from the water treatment plant that supplies drinking water to St. Louis. It is located in a region that is susceptible to tornadoes and periodic earthquakes, both having the potential to cause catastrophic disruption at the landfill and to the broader St. Louis community. An adjacent landfill, the Bridgeton Landfill, has a smoldering subsurface fire that currently is 600 feet from the known radioactive line. A smaller hotspot has appeared 300 feet away from the nuclear line. What is uncertain is what will happen if the fire reaches the radioactive waste. Some type of atomic explosion is very unlikely, if not impossible. What is plausible and even likely, however, is if the fire reaches the radioactive material and breaks through the surface, a plume of smoke will occur and radioactive materials will attach to carbon molecules in the smoke. Radioactive carbon molecules will attach to the smoke and will send wafting across the region in whatever direction the wind blows. The concern is so great that the St. Louis County has declared a state of emergency in 2014. The EPA and the people of St. Louis need to understand that the entire metropolitan region is at risk. The end of Lambert Airport is less than 2 miles east of the site, and the winds don't always blow east. They vary, and they won't spare affluent communities, corporate headquarters, or elite universities. What happens if a persistent radioactive smoke plume develops beyond the obvious and serious immediate health concerns? What would be the long-term economic impact to our region? Who would want to stay here? Why would anyone want to move here? I believe there's no greater threat to the future viability of this region. We cannot afford to continue to ignore this. Thank you. Thank you.
Can I get Senator Jill Shoup, Harvey Ferdman, and Byron Clemens up, please?
I apologize.
I know that we're going over a little bit on these testimonies. We really need to try to stick to the 2-minute. We're kind of getting close to time, so go ahead, thank you.
I thank you for being here. I was a longtime resident of Bridgeton. Both my daughters went to the Pattonville School District K through 12. My youngest daughter was 1 when we moved here, and when she was able to have children, she lost her first child, my first grandchild. He was born at 24 weeks and was not able to survive. Her second child, thank God, was born and was in the NICU for 3 months, and now we have a healthy girl except for her lungs. I have also known 3 adults and 2 children around these areas that have had brain tumors. How many people have you known to have a brain tumor? I've known 5, and that's just brain tumors. The EPA and Republic Services have a long history with this community of telling lies and playing word games to try to placate the very real fears of this community. That is highly insulting when it's been proven many times that the radiological material is leaving the site and has been for 40 years. And I want to make it known, it is one big hole in the ground that they have named North and South Quarry. But it is one hole. I want to make that very well known. It's made of limestone, it's very porous, and it's so porous that it continues to contaminate the groundwater. Another example are the ball fields that are less than a mile from the landfill as the crow flies or the wind blows. The EPA tested 2 inches down, the absolute minimum allowed, and found contamination, just not enough to clean up since it's a recreational area. How much dirt has blown off those fields where thousands of children have played over the last 40 years? Also, the landfill has not ever been fully tested to see where the radioactive material is spread to. That is insane, completely incompetent, and negligent. The EPA relies solely on the data findings given to them by the Republic Services. There's no independent samples or testing done by the EPA. Contamination has not only been found off-site in groundwater, it's also been found in trees, vegetation, a family farm, nearby businesses, and in homes that are at least a mile from the site. Some of the radioactive material dumped there is getting more radioactive and do so for the next 10+ centuries. That's thousands of years. It's getting even more dangerous and deadly. The radioactive material must be fully excavated at the site. If a cap is placed, the potentially responsible parties will say they have done their job and they are no longer responsible. So if the cap fails or it needs more work, the taxpayers are going to be stuck with having to pay for that for the next 1,000 years. This radioactive material must be fully excavated and the residents relocated immediately. Please be proactive and not reactive.
Thank you, Lori. Next up is Senator Jill Shute.
Good evening. I'm State Senator Jill Shute. I represent the district that abuts the landfill. The landfills are not in my district. But I'm here tonight because people in this district just happen to buy a house in a little bit different place than the people that I represent. And I came here, as you did, to listen tonight once again and to hear what they had to say. But I have to tell you, when I see a college student who came here to go to one of our fine universities get up here and understand the magnitude of this problem that affects all of us, when I hear where did she go? A junior high school student who has asthma and who is talking about the illness that her mother has and the impact on her and her family. And when I hear a 10-year-old get up and talk about the dangers of going where she goes to play and of looking at the landfill, when I hear from people who are young people talking about severe illnesses and death, and know that their grandparents and parents, this is the reality that they're living with, and these are the lessons their children are learning at these tender ages when they should be playing soccer and learning chemistry in theory, not living it every day. I had to get up and say something. This is an issue that was brought to me by Harvey and Karen and Dawn and Doug half of a decade ago. And we're in no different place from my perspective than we were then. It's great to have these listening sessions, but it is time for action, and the state of Missouri cannot do this without you. So please, I know you said you're doing more testing. It's time for action. These families deserve a better life than they are stuck in right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
to just listen and not respond. But when I said we were willing to do more testing, that was not to delay the remedy. I want to be very clear about that. We're trying to be sure that we have allayed all of the concerns that are there in areas that some of the residents may have some concern has not been tested, so we're trying to address that. But we are not slowing down the effort that Administrator Pruitt has put in place. So believe me, we will get to a solution and remediation rather quickly. So I just want you to be aware of that.
Thank you. Harvey?
Thank you for the opportunity to address you, Mr. Kelly and Ms. Stepp. Some 80 years ago, our country embarked on a critical life-saving mission to build a weapon so powerful that it would put an end to World War II. The resulting project, known as the Manhattan Project, began refining uranium in secret just a mile north of the Arch in downtown St. Louis. Historians credit this development and the creation of the nuclear bomb with saving countless American and Allied lives and ending the war years earlier than it would otherwise would have ended. Now St. Louis is paying a terrible price for its innovation, cooperation, and patriotism. Hundreds of cases of illnesses from exposure to radiation from the waste material left behind. It's time we stop creating new American casualties of World War II on American soil. It's time we relocate those in harm's way and remove this toxic material from our community.
You can do it. You got it.
Therefore, I ask for your support to clean this material out of our community to the highest standard available, and to relocate those living nearby during the process. I thank you and Administrator Pruitt for your efforts to protect our community. Hopefully you will be more successful than your predecessors.
Waiting.
Again, I want to thank you for having the listening session. It's a little frustrating for some of us that we've had to do this over and over again for years and years. I know there are two things that are intertwined here for me. These wastes have impacted on my family, and we've been exposed through multiple pathways. So my father worked right next to the airport site. When I learned about these wastes from Mrs. Dry and from a pediatrician at St. Joseph's Hospital in St. Charles who found cancer clusters around the Weldon Springs site, and that's when we first, it was canaries in the coal mine, children with leukemia and some rare cancers when we first found these wastes were around here. I wrote about these wastes in 1982 for the Riverfront Times, did 3 articles about it. I'm disappointed that the same issues that we knew about then are the same ones that we have now. None of these sites, not one of them, you know, there's anecdotal information. My father had cancer. He didn't get a little flag that said, I came from exposure to the site at the airport. I know that. But there's science and data that support these wastes were never located in the right place. The Mallinckrodt site in downtown St. Louis has been remediated. Guess what? It's still contaminated. It's still not been released because they haven't been able to get to all the material down below it. Coldwater Creek, Laddie Avenue, the airport site, they're all works in progress that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is working on. But scientifically, we have this thumbprint. It's uranium-235. That waste, that uranium came from one single mine in what was then called the Belgian Congo. And that thumbprint, we can track the waste from site to site. None of these sites was acceptable, never. The hydrology of this site, the geology of this site, its karst topography, it's in a cracked limestone, unlined place. It would never be considered for a landfill to put benzene and toluene now. right? It would fail any test to be a current new landfill. It was never a good site. The wastes were illegally dumped there, and I think in violation of the license to produce the waste in the first place. Illegally dumped. And the only thing that separates these wastes from the other one is that. So we're going to reward the polluters and the people putting out the pollution now by not following current law or what should have been done at that time. I really hope that we do relocate the folks in this area. They deserve it. And a complete, thorough remediation, which includes excavating all the waste. I was at a similar meeting in 2008 when the ROD was announced, and we didn't think that was an acceptable solution at that time, the plastic or what, the cap on top, because the material underneath would still be access to the water. And we know just fairly recently, once again, one more little fact, Missouri DNR found uranium-235 in the stormwater off-site. So I want to say thank you for doing a thorough assessment of the site and testing. Please include the periphery around the site as well. Thank you. I'm sorry, I couldn't.
You said you asked us not to reward the polluters. I think that was a comment
that we would separate these wastes for cleanup like all the other sites because they were illegally dumped. It doesn't make sense logically to me.
Okay.
We want the same remediation for the other sites.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth Green.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Phelan. I am a first-year student at Washington University in St. Louis. I was really appalled to learn about the crisis with Westlake Landfill. I moved here from out of state, from Reno, Nevada, so it was really a shock to hear that such a massive issue has been happening for so long and at such detriment to public health. The dangers here are clear enough to be obvious to a fourth grader. An underground fire, itself a massive hazard, directly adjacent to a nuclear waste repository is simply inviting disaster. The fact that this has been going on for over 4 decades and no concrete action has been taken is almost beyond comprehension. The simplest and most basic purpose of a government is to protect its citizens, and currently the government is failing its principal obligation. It would be a profound insult to your citizens, as well as an act of extreme negligence, to fail to deal with this ongoing crisis. I implore you to value the health of your citizens and the health of our environment. I implore you to take action. I implore you to implement relocation and excavation. Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Kelly, Ms. Smith. I'm Dan Hyatt. I'm a neighbor here. I'm an engineer, and I work at Washington University. I actually grew up from a site that is probably just as evil as Westlake Landfill at Santa Susana Field Laboratory in Los Angeles. They had 4 nuclear plant meltdowns there while I was living there for 3 of them, and they never told anybody for 30 years. They let us sit there in the plume. And my sister has parathyroid issues associated with it. Doctors won't test me because they don't believe that there was a nuclear plant meltdown near me. And one of them was much worse than 3 Mile Island, but they don't know how much worse because their instruments couldn't measure how high it was. Like Westlake Landfill had radiological, chemical, and other problems that they have well documented the issues. It was also the watershed for the San Fernando, Simi, and Keono valleys, and you can't use the groundwater there because what they did at SS Field Laboratory. In Santa Monica, nearby, you can't use groundwater there because one gas station had an underground storage tank that leaked benzene. And yet here we have this toxic dump. Literally, it's not 2 miles from the Missouri River. The canals are right next door that are associated with the Missouri River, which attaches almost immediately to the Mississippi River, which, hey, you know, if something happens like what they said, it's not a karst system. It's limestone. It's a karst system. They like to lie to us. They tell us that it's not a fire, it's an exothermic chemical reaction. Look it up. A fire is an exothermic chemical reaction. They talk about the coalition to keep us safe. Oh, that's Republic Waste hiring a bunch of people to try and discredit us and try to get out of paying their share of cleaning this thing up. But if this thing gets in underneath, like at the Corvette Museum where the bottom fell out, and it gets into the Missouri River, it goes straight into the Mississippi River and might make Deepwater Horizon look like child's play. It might affect 1,000 miles of Mississippi River in the heartland of the United States. They've been looking at it for 30 years. How do you investigate for 30 years and still not have an answer? It's because you're not researching. It's because you're sitting on it, not doing anything. And so, I drive by and I have to roll up my car window because I start hacking and the smell is just horrible and it's indescribable. It's just absolutely horrible, and I keep complaining to the state. They can't do anything about it. We need you to do something about it. Republic Waste will not do it on their own. They will do everything they can to get out of paying their share. We need you to please step to the plate, get this done. They know how to do it. As I say, Coldwater Creek and the other sites are this, but this is Mother Lode because they scooped it up and put it here. They scooped it up from the other places and put it here.
Thank you, Dan.
Very much.
Scott Kamen. And can we get Dr. Taylor and Anna Veselnik to come up, and Sue Foley.
We're almost to the end.
All right. Mr. Kelly, sir, I want to take just 1 minute and tell you about the overarching concern for this community and the St. Louis area at large. That concern is the tale that the residents here are being asked to accept. It is a tale of two cities. The owners of the landfill in the prior EPA administration live in the city of Fantasyland. In Fantasyland, there is no such thing as a Bridgeton, North County cancer cluster. There's no such thing as off-site contamination or a single conclusive scientific study that shows the landfill to pose any health risk to residents whatsoever. Residents of Fantasyland believe it is possible to spend decades doing nothing but testing, and when their biased tests predictably return nothing but a picture of Mayberry, they absolve themselves of having to actually do anything. In Fantasyland, that smell that is so pungent so many days of the year, safe. That radiation found just beyond the landfill's magic fence doesn't exist. The contamination found in residential backyards, on athletic fields, and even behind residents' refrigerators, a conspiracy theory. Residents of Fantasyland do not believe in any contrary scientific results that paints Fantasyland in any unethical, uninformed, or incompetent way whatsoever. The second city is the city of reality. In the city of reality, we understand the critical role Mallinckrodt Chemical Works played with the local development of nuclear weapons during the Manhattan Project. We understand that two former Mallinckrodt sites here in St. Louis, Destrehan Avenue and Weldon Spring, were considered to be so badly contaminated by the federal government that they received a special status under an act of Congress that all one merely had to do to receive compensation was to prove their family member worked at Mallinckrodt during certain time periods. My grandfather was a foreman at Mallinckrodt Chemical Works. He and most of his co-workers died of radiological illnesses as it was revealed Mallinckrodt kept critical safety information from them and even performed certain radiological experimentation on them without their knowledge or consent. Portions of the exact pile of waste my grandfather worked on during the Cold War are buried here at Westlake Landfill. The people here are being exposed every day by air, land, and water without their knowledge or consent. They have no act of Congress or special statuses protecting them. They continue to pay the price for U.S. victories in World War II and the Cold War. This is what it's like to live in the city of reality. Residents are asked to accept this heavy price because no one has pockets deep enough. People aren't healthy enough, and they don't have enough crayons to explain the dire situation to their neighbors in Fantasyland. The last EPA administration lived in Fantasyland. I, for one, am hoping you all roll up your sleeves and make the hard choice. That choice is not to put a cap on top of a landfill with Swiss cheese bottom. That choice is to mobilize heavy assets, heavy talents, and deeply qualified experts to remove this waste. For our neighbors in Fantasyland who believe it's too dangerous to do so, I would urge them to buy a home in Spanish Village and in a few months' time have the dust behind their refrigerators tested. As you hear from the community tonight and on into the future, I urge you to seriously consider if the EPA is going to continue living in Fantasyland or if they will finally make the move to reality.
Thank you.
Welcome to St. Louis. I'm Dr. Lisa Martino-Taylor. I'm an expert in Cold War radiological weapons tests. I'm 16 miles from the radiation landfill that has an underground fire moving towards and is within feet of tons of radioactive waste, with no known way to contain the fire. This was a former quarry. This was not a landfill. It was not designed to be a landfill. A cap will not suffice. It's important to note that when, not if, but when, the fire hits radioactive material, there will be no explosion, but rather silent releases of radioactive particles into the open air, where they can travel long distances, enter building structures, and as the U.S. Army has stated, quote, inhaled into the lungs and deposited into the bones. This radioactive waste and fire presents an imminent threat to the region. The military knew that radioactive waste was harmful by 1943. There is no reason to not remove and isolate this waste. This imminent hazard is located 19 miles as the crow flies from Godfrey, Illinois. It's 14 miles from St. Louis Community College in Kirkwood, 11 miles from Clayton, Missouri, 8 miles from Parkway Central High School, 17 miles from Madison, Illinois, 7 miles from Overland, Missouri, 6 miles from Creve Coeur Park, 13 miles from Baldwin, Missouri, 9 miles from Chesterfield, 11 miles from Washington University, 14 miles from Webster University, 9 miles from Ladue, 8 miles from St. Louis Community College in Ferguson, Missouri, 9 miles from St. Luke's Hospital in Chesterfield, 8 miles from Parkway Central High School, 8 miles from DeSmet High School, 10 miles from Plaza Frontenac. It's obvious to everyone here who has any sense of decency that action must be taken now. The radioactive waste must be removed. It must be relocated. It must be isolated immediately. Full removal and voluntary buyout must happen, and it must happen quickly. As far as I'm concerned, in the past, the EPA has engaged in malfeasance and misfeasance. You have an opportunity to make a difference now. I urge you to take immediate action, including full removal, isolation, and relocation of residents.
Thank you for coming and tolerate my accent. I became aware of the dangerous situation around the Westlake landfill 4 years ago, and the first that linked in the media. At that time, my dad was going through the glioblastoma treatment at the Simon Cancer Center. The only link is radioactive exposure. He got his at Chernobyl. So because of all our family exposed and we've been through the nightmares of Chernobyl, 21 years ago, we took our daughter and did everything possible, moved. For me, the city that's like located 200 miles from Chernobyl, where still people were dying and getting sick, and it was not 10 miles, it was not 11 miles, it was not 16 miles. It was 200 miles away from Chernobyl, and people were still affected. So when I first heard about it, I thought that I'm having a déjà vu nightmare. Because, you know, we are Chernobyl refugees, as I consider myself. And the more I read about it, the more information I got, that I realized it's not a nightmare, it's a horrific reality. Many people do not understand the danger of radiations, but sadly I do. I came from the country that suffered from the radioactive exposure. As same as here, our country, our government said that radiation is safe. Therefore, they started closing the cancer treatment centers, so there are no statistics for cancer for people. So we do not have numbers of people who died there without being treated. My father-in-law is one of them. Even statistics have mistakes when they're based on incomplete data. Now, 1 year after we moved from the Chernobyl area, I realized the statement the doctor who had the checkup with us when we came to the United States, and he asked the reason for our immigration. I said, because we wanted to move away from Chernobyl. It was an old doctor, I don't remember his name. He gave me a look and said, you picked the wrong place, honey. He didn't tell me anything else, but now I understand that it was a wrong place to get away from Chernobyl. Because we have here our own mini Chernobyl. The water is not safe to drink because the groundwater is pollinated. The air we breathe, we can say a zillion times that it's safe, but the radioactive particles after Chernobyl traveled 700 miles to Sweden, and that's where they were first located, that there was an explosion. Otherwise, nobody would ever know. And they traveled 800 miles to Germany, the Germany that here threw away the whole crop of hazelnuts because it's been radioactive after the Chernobyl, 800 miles from the site. And I'm worried about the food that we eat, because several very popular local farms are located within the proximate distance of the site of the landfill, and we buy the produce in Schnucks, in Durbergs, and advertise as the locally grown products. And most of all, I'm honestly worried about what happens if it's an explosion. The shelter in place not going to work. The problem, the catastrophe that happened with Chernobyl was blamed on the Soviet bureaucrats. What the catastrophe of Westlake is blamed on. You know, it's been 31 years since April 26, 1986 of Chernobyl. It's been 44 years since the radioactive materials were dumped at Westlake. Thank you.
Can I have Donna Clockey, Sarah Hedge, and Don Chapman?
I was shocked, Mr. Kelly, when I heard you say I'm sorry. Because in the past, EPA has wanted to talk or to mock this community. Like the Region 7 director, who, when confronted with the number of deaths from brain tumors, said, well, people die every day. They do, but not at the rates and rarity of diseases found in this area. So thank you. My family's been forever impacted by radioactive waste. My house backed up to a finger of Coldwater Creek. My basement flooded. We ate from the vegetable garden. My daughter contracted a rare, incurable fatal leukemia, CML. My brother has non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. He played the creek. My dad died of a rare testicle cancer after helping to build a subdivision around the creek where the soil was rerouted. My granddaughter, the only one of my grandchildren who lived around there, has severe immune issues. I could go on and on. I personally find it offensive when the EPA tries to tell us that the fingerprint of the waste here differs from the creek. The EPA says capping the landfill is a good option. In a word, no. It is not. I currently live near Weldon Spring. Weldon Spring, where under the DOE's legacy program, there's an engineered leachate collection and removal system in a mountain of radioactive waste with leaking areas and creeks that are still contaminated. It's an area with high childhood leukemia rates, but no one talks about that. Instead, the public is encouraged to visit the monument to World War II workers and have school children sit on the grass and enjoy the view. Is that what you want for this community? We want the waste removed from Westlake Landfill. If the EPA can't or won't do it, then turn it over to the Army Corps of Engineers. They're already removing the same waste just a few miles from here. I hope that with this listening session, it's not just a check mark on a list of things that the EPA has done, but it's to really deliberate and hear what we're saying. Please do the right thing, not the cheapest thing. For the long-term protection of this community, the only real solution is excavation and relocation of residents. Please relay that to Mr. Pruitt and to President Trump. If they want a win, removal is the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Donna's not going to speak. Could we have Sarah Hedge, please?
I appreciate everything that's been said thus far, and more than anything, I appreciate and offer my condolences to the people of Bridgeton who have to wake up to this nightmare every morning. I'm concerned over the way the EPA is handling this issue. Why is it the EPA added Westlake to their national priorities list in 1990, and here we are 27 years later still discussing how to deal with the issue? I understand that these things take time, they're complex, and require studies and planning. But in 27 years, you've done nothing to remove or contain the waste. What is the purpose of the EPA being involved here? Who or what are you fighting for? You are certainly not fighting for us, for health, for safety, or environment, despite the mission of the EPA being to protect human health and the environment. Can you honestly say the situation is okay to continue to dither over? Would you be content living near the landfill, waking each morning to the smell, to the stress, to your children coughing? No, you would find it absolutely unacceptable for your family. So why is it acceptable for our families? I don't live in Bridgeton, but these people are my neighbors. This is my community, and I refuse to sit back and watch them suffer. Surely you can feel the same. And honestly, this is beyond Bridgeton. This is a regional problem. It is naive to believe that we understand the full extent of the waste and the risk of closure, because studies have shown otherwise. It is naive to believe the waste will remain contained to the site forever while you continue to delay action, despite the potential for earthquakes, flooding, groundwater seepage, and so forth. Are you going to allow another 27 years to pass before you finally decide what it is you will do? By the time you decide to act, it may be too late. Like many people, I lost faith in the EPA years ago. Don't you want to regain our trust and respect? Wouldn't you be proud to be part of an organization that actually does protect human health and the environment over businesses and profits? You are monitoring, you are sampling, and you are generally implying that you're on top of the issue, but this is not true. You've had 27 years to monitor and sample. Now you try to pacify this crowd of victims by saying you're going to continue to test. It's time for action. It's time to accept that you are incapable of meeting our community's needs. Please recommend jurisdiction of the site be passed over the Army Corps of Engineers Fuse Wrap program. I know no one likes to admit that they failed, but passing over the site is not weakness, it is strength. It is not failure, it is success. It would be incredibly brave of the EPA to say, hey, we tried, but this is taking too long and these communities need help now. Regain our trust and our support. Be the heroes here instead of another villain. Join us, work with us instead of against us. Fuse Wrap now.
Thank you. We're going to let documents come up and speak since Donna did not. He was still on the list.
No.
Thank you. Sit back down, girl.
Yeah, boss.
I'm Doug Clements. I grew up here, founder and past chair of the Westlake Bridgeton Landfill Community Advisory Group. I care about this community. For 4 years, every meeting at the CAG, I said, for the record, I would like full grid testing throughout the landfill. I found out about radioactive waste in St. Louis and St. Charles when I was 13 years old. I've been working on this issue for over 30 years. I'm not going to tell you about my thyroid. I'm not going to tell you about my dad's cancer. You came from private industry, so I'm going to take a different approach. Let me put it to you this way. We, the people, are your board of directors. I dislike having uncomfortable conversations. I prefer everyone to be on task and not have to be managed. We need to have a serious conversation about EPA's duties and responsibilities. He came on board in May. I hope you've settled in well, but as they say, the honeymoon's over. Radioactive waste around St. Louis has been being cleaned up because it's part of the job. There's one glaring exception, Westlake Landfill. Your division has been falling down on the job for 27 years. 33 years ago, another regulatory body told us that radioactive material was leaving the site at the time. During that time, I was right up the street, going to high school. It doesn't surprise me that members of my graduating class have immunodeficiency problems and other health concerns. They have fertility issues. It doesn't surprise me that they found radioactive waste in the ball field. It doesn't surprise me they find radioactive waste in people's houses. I'll give you one example of your team's performance. Citizens of this community detected radioactive waste in the local ball field using Geiger counters. They took soil samples, sent those soil samples off to a certified laboratory. The laboratory confirmed there was radioactive waste in those samples. Do you know what your team did? They said publicly some well-meaning citizens tried to play scientists and they should leave it to the professionals. They then devised a test that hit the minimum legally permissible level of the testing depth for soil samples. Not even what the EPA recommends for its own testing. The EPA would recommend 18 inches, they used 2. Of course, they didn't find anything. And they told those kids they could play ball on those fields. This is just one example of what your team has done in the past. Are you comfortable with this? Moving forward, let's go for the low-hanging fruit. Offer a voluntary buyout for everyone within 2 miles of the site. Provide this community with property value assurance so that we don't have a suffering tax base as a result of this work. And get this poison out of our community. Not just in the landfill, but everywhere you find it.
Thank you, John.
I just want to start saying I am so proud of this community tonight. I grew up not from here in a place that I knew was safe. So I know what it feels like to be safe. So now that I am raising my kids in a place that I don't feel safe and I know it's not safe for them, it is such a shock to me. It really is. It's so hard. And I'm going to tell you, my 12-year-old wanted to come and speak tonight. But he didn't want to tell you the stories of his friends that live in Spanish Village because he says, Mom, they're embarrassed. They're embarrassed. He said, we ride the school bus every day past kindergarten through middle school. And when the kids get to Spanish Village, they pull their noses up. Everybody on the bus holds their nose in the morning and in the evening. Those kids know that they live next to a burning site and radioactive waste. Now I know why my kid's shirt's stretched out. Figured that out in this little ordeal too. But he said they're embarrassed, Mom, and I don't know if I can get up and talk about them because I have to ask them first. And it's heartbreaking. And they're worried about their friends. I have in my hand here, and I'm going to give it to you, a note home from our school. Karen and I knew these notes were coming out in a few days, but it didn't matter. When I opened that book back and I saw this note, my heart just broke. And at dinner, I had to sit down with my 3 special needs kids, and I had to tell them that if anything happens to them at the end of the day, they have to stay together. And I told my son, who then was only 9 years old, he has 2 little ones, and I said, you're going to have to stay with them. You're going to have to protect them. That was the hardest conversation to have, and it's still hard. Every morning when I send them off on the bus, do you have your lunch, your socks match, this or that? And I hug them and say goodbye to them, and I know that at the end of the day, anything could happen at this site. You guys have an opportunity here. You may not be able to do anything with this fire, but you can remove this radioactive waste. And I have to tell you, normal kids are scared of what's under their bed or in their closet. Mine are terrified of this site. Terrified. I love this community. I was pregnant when I moved here. I fell in love with this community. We were going to retire from this. Don't do this to us. We're strong. We're real strong. We can handle it. If you tell us it's going to take us 10 years to remove this waste, we're going to stand right there next to you through the whole thing. We can take it. We're survivors. But I don't know that we'll survive if you don't choose that option. I really don't. I don't want to leave this area. Everybody asks us, why don't you leave? Because I have looked all over the state of Missouri. You will not find a community like this. I can't find a community like this. And these people like Connie, they've grown up here all their lives. They have seen family and friends die. We can't do anything for those people. All those people that Alex, when we raised our hands, we can't do anything, but we can keep it from happening in the future, and we have to. We're here. We're so happy you're here. I need your help. I know this is a mean PRP. They just beat the heck out of us today. That's okay. I've got more room. They can put more bruises on me. That's fine. Because you know what? I am just a mom. And I want nothing more in this life. I don't want to be part of an organization. I don't want to run for office. All I want is to finish this, see this through to the end, get this cleaned up, and have my kids be safe. And the only way to do that is to remove this waste and relocate those people. It has to happen. I don't know if they're going to sue you, but I'll tell you what, let them try. Because watch this whole community stand next to you when they try and pull that kind of garbage.
Thank you all very much. We are out of time, but I do want to tell you right now that Mr. Kelly has agreed to stay. He's going to listen to anybody else that needs to speak with him, or would like the opportunity to speak with him, or Mrs. Stepp.
Yeah, we'd like to make a couple of closing comments, if that's all right.
So I want to again thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to bear witness to all of you who are willing to give your testimonials to all of us this evening. And I cannot for a moment imagine being, having experienced the type of pain and heartache and loss that so many of you have experienced in your lives. And I'm a big believer in, I have a very strong faith background, and I know it's not politically correct to talk about that when you're a government official. But I found that this would be a really great opportunity to do that and to share with you that I believe that you get put in certain places for reasons in this life. And I believe it is really a blessing to me that I'm here with all of you this evening. And I want to thank you so much for encouraging me and making me a much more rounded and better informed person. And I also want to commit to you that our staff and our team at EPA is going to work really hard to get the best available science and to come up with the best available ideas to be able to solve this problem once and for all for each and every one of you, those who came before and those who are to come after. So thank you, and God bless each one of you for being here.
Thank you all for your long time here and listening to all of us. One of the things that we have done is we've reached out to the Attorney General's office. I think Laura Ellsberg is here in the back. Laura, you want to wave your hand? They are working hard as well to bring their public litigation to a successful close in some manner, shape, or form that will be beneficial. And we hope that we can work with them, we have been, and we can work together on that issue so that we can have a successful resolution of this. I think all of you have reason to be angry. I'm appreciative of your words. I think that your government has let you down, and there's really no way to sugarcoat that other than to say, Doug, it is on our watch now. We set that watch. We also are doing all we can to be sure that we proceed properly. And we'd like to have done and finished this yesterday, as all the rest of you are would. But we're not going to sit there and say we're going to study this some more. We don't need to study anymore. We don't need to kick the can down the road. We are obligated to proceed in certain ways. We're obligated to put out there all range of remedies and alternatives. All of us know that there's no chance in the world that no action is an alternative. We're required to put that there, so that's there. But I will tell you, you have no reason to believe us tonight. None. You've had every reason to doubt us. And so all I can say is you will have to judge us by our action. You're welcome to have our contact numbers if you'd like them. We're glad to give you that. I think you criticized me for that, but I'm still available to give you contact numbers. You have there's a great commitment from a lot of great professionals. There's a great commitment from our administrator. And so we accept the challenge of getting this fixed and getting it fixed right, which we will do. But I also ask you to be part of that solution. Let us hear from you. Don't just say, we had a community meeting, so we're finished talking. If you have issues, let's keep talking about it and expect us to move as rapidly as we can. Don't suffer in silence. Pick up the phone and call us. Talk with Kathy, talk with Ed Shue, talk with Mary Peterson. We're all committed to this. We have as much staff as we have. Believe me, as much as we have on this. So we would be glad to hang around up here and talk as long as you would like. Glad to answer the questions we know. I think we still have our technical folks over there in whichever direction that is. Corps of Engineers is there as well. So we're thankful tonight. Karen, Don, thank you all for your hosting of us. And we can see this through to a conclusion. I hope we can come back when we are signing the rod and moving forward on this. And so with that, I will give you the honor. Thank you.
So this is one of the speaking session. I just want to tell you guys, we've thanked them several times, but we can't do this without you guys. We are just two moms, but we're two moms with an entire community supporting us. And for that, we thank you. We thank you for sharing your stories and being brave enough to come here tonight and open your hearts and let other people in. So thank you very much.